Yeah. Hi,
Hello.
Gemma.
Hi.
Thank you for teaching us.
Sure.
We would like to start with Yaron Bayer that will give us some explanation about what is going on with the Dharma Friends of Israel. So Yaron, please.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Ashima. Thank you for
Hi.
teaching.
Hi, Yaron.
Just a few announcements before we start. There are a few activities
Yaron Bayer.
that we're going to have in the next few months in the Dharma Friends. You're welcome to join. We have Jitsu Matens and Palmo will conduct a question and answer session in the 27th of January. So you're welcome to send your Q&A, your question. בעברית יהיה לנו מפגש ב-27 לראשון עם תנזים פלמו. אפשר לשלוח שאלות לפני כן, זה מאוד נחמד. On March, we have Jado Rinpoche visiting Israel around in the middle of March. You're all welcome to join. It will be also broadcast online. במרץ יש לנו ביקור של ז'אדו רינפוצ'ה. זה מאוד נחמד. On June, we have Tsenshap Serkom Rinpoche. And on July, Geshe Doje Damdol. So if you want, you can check out on the website for all the activities. And if you know Hebrew, join our mailing list or our Facebook page. אז יש לנו גם ביקור של סרקום רינפוצ'ה ביוני, וגשת דוז'ה דמדול ביולי 23. אתם מוזמנים ומוזמנות להצטרף לרשימת תפוצה ולקבל עדכונים, לעקוב בפייסבוק, וזהו. Thank you very much, sorry. And that's all.
Geshe, you are now a co-host.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, Yaron. Great. So let's start. As usual, we start with some breathing meditation to just let go of any disruptive thoughts. Just be focused. And then in order to set your motivation, let's start with visualizing our object of refuge, the Buddha who's in the space in front of us. Who's a one nature with your Lama. Manifesting as a fully ordained monk. Seated in a full lotus position. With his right hand in the earth touching, in the earth touching mudra, or earth touching gesture. And his left resting in his lap in the meditation gesture. Holding a begging bowl. compassionately looking at you and all other sentient beings who are surrounding us. Think that completely surrounded by sentient beings who all appear in human form. All deserving to be happy, but constantly creating the causes for future suffering. Having the same potential we have, potential to become fully enlightened. And so generate affectionate love, a deep feeling of care and closeness for each of those beings. Aware of their Buddha nature. And understanding that they just want to be happy and not to suffer. And focusing in particular on their different sufferings to generate great compassion. A loving attitude that wishes for all the sentient beings to be free from any type of suffering. Together with a wish, may I be able to protect them from all their sufferings, all their unwanted experiences, and their causes. And that aspiration then grows stronger and gives way to determination to do whatever is necessary to help sentient beings to overcome suffering and its causes. And since we can only effectively do so once we've removed all the obstructions to enlightenment from our own mind, let's generate bodhicitta, the sincere aspiration to become enlightened for the benefit of all sentient beings. And it's also with this motivation that we continue to study fundamental wisdom. That you're doing so for the benefit of all sentient beings. And without letting go of the visualization and your motivation, let's recite the prayer together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Okay, so I'm a co-host now, right? Great. So let me just open the Lam room. Well, the Lam room outlines. Can you see them? Wait.
No, we don't see anything.
No, okay, I made a mistake. Let me just do it again. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, it's okay.
It's working, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the Lam room outlines, can you see them now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Now we're pretty much done. Well, no, we're not done with the precious human life, but these are the last aspects of the precious human life, of your practice of this particular point of the Lam room. And even though I'll ask you to go through the last 3 points here, don't forget what we've gone through before. So to remember again and again how incredibly fortunate we are, the opportunities we have. I mean, this is, of course, highly effective in general when we feel depressed and we feel low about something that's happened. And we have the tendency to focus just on whatever's gone wrong, but then to make it a habit also in those moments to reflect on how fortunate we really are, that whatever problem we experience right now, well, it's samsara, no surprise there. It's to be expected that problems arise. And of course, they come and go. They're like dark clouds. They're there one moment and they're gone in the next moment. And so to take this meditation, make it a habit, as I say, in situations when, well, the going is rough, things are difficult. But of course, also to practice the Dharma in general, we need this thought, this attitude to make the most of our precious human life. And for that, we need to, of course, become aware of it again and again. To look at those who are less fortunate, put ourselves into their shoes. That's, of course, highly effective to really get a sense, I'm so fortunate. I'm not in that situation. I've got so many freedoms, so many opportunities. So really get the sense how special our existence is, how useful it is, and how difficult it is to get to attain such an existence. And that takes us to the third point, to consider the difficulty of obtaining such a precious human life. From the point of view of its causes, of course, to attain a situation we're in right now, well, it's not easy. It doesn't necessarily come natural in the sense that, well, we're controlled by our misapprehension of reality, which gives rise to self-cherishing, self-centeredness. And that in turn almost automatically gives rise to attachment towards that which is mine, my family, my friends, anger towards that which harms I and that which is mine, and so forth. So those come naturally, while those are not the causes for taking this kind of rebirth we've taken. So, of course, here thinking about the future in particular, to make sure we're again reborn with such opportunity, again having the same freedoms and so forth. So the causes for that, they're difficult to accumulate, to make sure we continue to accumulate them, but also become aware that, well, we were so fortunate to be reborn in the situation we're in right now, but it was difficult. The causes were not easy, were not easily accumulated, because it's ethical conduct. It's the far-reaching attitude in the sense of being not narrow-minded, not just thinking of here and right now, thinking of not just myself, but also of other sentient beings. And pure prayers, of course, aspirational thoughts. May I have the opportunity, may I do this, that, and the other. So praying for positive human rebirth, of course, that's also important. And that it's difficult to obtain, well, from the viewpoint of analogies, you've probably all heard of the analogy of the yolk on the surface of the ocean that's floating there, moving here and there, floating here and there. And the analogy goes that at the bottom of the ocean, there's this turtle who's blind. And every 100 years, she comes up to the surface, and the likelihood that her head actually goes through the yolk, that is more likely that this happens than having a precious human rebirth. Now, this may be hard to believe. That may seem difficult to believe in the sense that, well, we have one now. I know quite a few people who've got one. Plus, well, I may have had one before this life, and I'll have one in my next life, and so forth. But it's important to understand what this actually means. Once we're on the right track, once we're actually making the practice of the Dharma a habit, yes, we're more likely to have one after the other. But we don't know whether this is the first one in like trillions of years of just being reborn in the lower realms as animals, as humans with very little opportunities and so forth. So it's like, after all these times, we finally had this opportunity. And so from that point of view, you can see how rare that is. And even if it were a few lives before that, we had already a precious human life. It's taken us to where we are right now. We don't know how long it's going to last. And if we don't accumulate the causes for a future precious human life, well, it's difficult to get another one, because it's so much easier to be reborn in the lower realm. And then in the third point, just from the point of view of numbers, I mean, just think in terms of your family, your friends, how many people are really interested in the Dharma. And like, of course, where I live, for instance, there's some people that express their interest. They say, oh yeah, Buddhism, it's really interesting. But their interest is never strong enough to even just pick up a book and read about the Dharma. Forget about putting it into practice, listening to teachings and so forth. So there are very few. And here we're just talking about, well, the human world. Think about animals and the other realms. I mean, it's hard to imagine. But I mean, if the Buddha is so spot on when it comes to compassion and about emptiness and so forth, why should he be lying about the lower realms? I mean, it's bad enough to be reborn as an animal, as certain animals, as a street dog in Calcutta and so forth, or even any other, well, even the Western country, being certain animals being exploited and so forth. So just to encourage people to practice, well, you didn't have to talk about the lower realms. So that there are other realms of existence that we just cannot perceive. Well, again, why would the Buddha have lied about it? Anyway, so just from the point of view of numbers, if there are these lower realms, there are going to be so many more living beings there than, for instance, in the animal realms, if you just think of insects and so forth. So of the countless living beings who live in this universe, and we can assume that there are other universes anyway, in this world system, how many of all the different living beings, we are this tiny, tiny, tiny percentage. And this is so rare, and we really need to take the essence of this life. So to spend this week, again, if you have the time, if you have the interest, to focus on that really important aspect of the number. Okay, great. Then let's return to the topic, to the text. Okay, I'll just make some adjustments here. Can you all see the text clearly?
Yes.
Yes? Okay,
Yes,
great.
thank you.
All right. So I've prepared a few more pages, and I've already mentioned it last time. If you, of course, that would be best if you take Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary as we go through these verses. If you can read the Ocean of Reasoning, I think it's been made available to you. Anyway, it is available online. You don't have to look for it very hard. I mean, there are free copies available. And so I hope that the author that they actually put it on there. I'm not really sure about that. But anyway, the point is that if you can read this text at the same time, that's of course best. But anyway, as I said last time, I talked about it last time, that this is really difficult. Some of the explanations Lama Tsongkhapa gives are quite difficult. So I'm just trying to summarize a little bit of what he says. So following the explanation of the 8 attributes, and thereby the explanation of the verse of homage, there's about, I forget how many pages it is in the Ocean of Reasoning, 10, 20 pages of kind of introductory explanation. What is the misapprehension? What does conventional existence mean? He mentions the true truth. What does it mean to conventionally exist? So he just briefly introduces these aspects, and I'm doing this in this handout as well. So don't be surprised that it takes a little longer to get to the first verse, but that's just the way, that's just the style of teaching. Before you get to the text, you just lay the groundwork a little bit. And of course, that's quite common to the educational style in the West, the teaching style in the West. Okay, but before we move on, move on to the next topic, which is the misperception itself, to discuss that further, I want to go over the 8 attributes again, just because last time I went through them quite quickly. And there's a few things I'd like to just repeat again, or maybe I'd like to add a few things, because these 8 are the basis for everything that's going to come. I mean, they're the basis of Buddhist philosophy to a certain degree. There's more to it, but like I said, they're like the basis. If you have an understanding of those 8, things are much easier. And some of them are pretty straightforward and easily understood, while others may be a little bit more difficult. Anyway, now what we've learned here, cessation and arising being the first 2. Well, first of all, the order here is cessation first and arising second, but you've already heard that this is, if phenomena exist inherently, the order wouldn't matter. If ceasing comes first and arising comes later, it doesn't matter, because if things existed inherently, anything would be possible. And arising and cessation actually wouldn't be possible. I mean, anything would be possible and nothing would be possible. It'll be bizarre, the possibilities, basically. So therefore, cessation, arising, and to point this out, that nothing makes any sense if things exist inherently, or on the other hand, everything would be possible, like, depending on which perspective you take. Well, to point that out, cessation is mentioned first and arising second, but I didn't do that. You see, the explanation I give, and then also the drawing, first it's arising, because we talk about conventional arising. First there's arising, then there's cessation. Okay, so we've had this. I spoke about it last time at the time of the cause, which is those 4 moments, very simplified version, of course, of the cause. Well, I guess 4 moments, how long are these moments? It just depends. It could be a day. I mean, you wouldn't call it in everyday language, you wouldn't call it a moment. That's also true for the Tibetan word. But actually, a moment can be this long and that long. I mean, how long is a moment? Very difficult to determine. So really, in the philosophical context, you could say, yeah, well, as long as you want, make it a day, make it an hour, and so forth. Anyway, so here I've just chosen to take 4 moments, however long they are. And during that time, we say, during the time of the seed, the sprout arises. Okay. And then during this time, the sprout arises. And during this time, the sprout has arisen. So in terms of the 3 times, arising, having arisen, about to arise, I mean, they're contradictory when it comes to a particular phenomenon. So the seed is arising, the seed has arisen with regard to the sprout. The sprout, is taking the sprout as the example. So the sprout arising and having arisen, that's obviously contradictory. Can't be both, which is why we say the sprout arises during its cause. And that makes perfect sense. It makes sense, but we shouldn't forget, and that has been stressed also, it has been mentioned in the explanation, that this is on the conventional level. On a conventional level, there is nothing intrinsic in the seed, like an arising, in such a sense that you may take a microscope, look into the seed, and there's this little, I'm arising, like a little sign, I'm arising, right? That's not happening. I mean, it's like there's a sense there's a concrete arising happening. But actually, someone's put on there. Okay, yeah, now you're muted, great. Anyway, so there's a sense that there's this innate arising happening, very concrete, but actually it's just labeled. How is it labeled? Well, on the basis of the fact that during the time of the seed, there is no sprout, but then something arises from the seed. Something arises, or something has arisen, I should say. Something is there now that we no longer call seed, but we call sprout. And since this time period is of importance, is essential for that phenomenon that we now call sprout to actually appear, we label the sprout as arising during that time. Okay. Of course, it's not doing so totally on its own. You need the seed, you need other conditions such as warmth and water and so forth, called cooperative conditions. We'll talk more about them as part of the first chapter. But anyway, the point being, we just say it arises. There's no real rising to be found other than the one we label on the basis of something that is not arising, right? I mean, on the basis of something other than arising. So on the basis of later on having something, right? During this time, we talk about, during the time of the seed, we talk about the sprout arising, but just in relation or in dependence on the fact that later on, there's this thing we call sprout. And since this period is essential for that to take, for that sprout to take place, since the period of the seed is essential for later on that sprout to arise, we label sprout is arising. And then how about seizing? The sprout is seizing. Again, it's not like you can take apart this sprout and look for some concrete seizing to be found. Just labeled on the basis that you have here 4 moments of a sprout. First of all, each moment is different. So obviously the sprout is changing. And in this case here, the changes are pretty obvious from the first to the second to the third and fourth moment. But even on a subtler level, there are changes that our eye consciousness wouldn't perceive from moment to moment. From that point of view, so the fact that this is from moment to moment different. So an earlier moment ceases, an earlier moment of the sprout ceases to give rise to a later moment and a later moment of sprout. From that point of view, and based on the fact at some point there's no longer any sprout, it's totally gone, it has ceased, we can talk about the sprout ceasing. We label ceasing. And that's it. It's in relation to something other than the action of ceasing, the sprout, the moments, moment by moment, the fact that one day it's gone, and so forth. Based on that, we label ceasing. The sprout ceases. Okay. All right. So hopefully in that sense, you get an understanding that there's no inherent ceasing, but there's no inherent arising, no inherent ceasing, but conventionally, it makes perfectly sense to talk of the sprout coming into existence, in other words, therefore arising, and the sprout, well, ceasing, going slowly out of existing. So this ceasing, that this is on a conventional level. All right. And then the same, if you look at the next idea, or the next concept, annihilation and permanence. Annihilation and permanence. Did I really do it the other way around? The other way around? Yes, I talked about first, such as the table, as long as the table. Oh, yes, I did. So on an ultimate level, like I said, if inherently there were annihilation and permanence, well, you could switch them around. First annihilation and then permanence. But since what I'm depicting here is the conventional level, so we talk about permanence first. And permanence, please don't misunderstand, it should be in quotation marks. I put it in quotation marks actually here. You see permanence, permanent here, it's in quotation marks, because we're not talking about permanence in the usual sense. The word is sometimes used in a slightly different way. Usually permanence means not changing moment by moment. Not changing moment by moment, something that doesn't change moment by moment is permanent. Something that exists but doesn't change moment by moment is described as permanent. But here it means something different. In this context, it means that something remains for some time. It remains for some time as a continuum. First example is the tree trunk. It remains during the existence of a tree trunk. So it's, you cut it down, it's lying there for a few days. The wood has to dry before you can actually craft something from it and so forth. So it's definitely a period of time. And during that time, it's a tree trunk. It's got a continuum and it remains a tree trunk until it changes to such a degree that we can no longer call it a tree trunk, right? Okay, you make furniture from it. In the case of this table, or you can make more from that one tree trunk, but let's say you just craft all these tables, you make all these tables from it. So now, at that point, the continuum that has previously existed as a continuum, as a tree trunk, has existed as a continuum of a tree trunk, now it's become the continuum of a table. This exists now as a table. It's permanent in the sense of it exists for a certain period of time as a continuum of a table. It continues to be a table, while its previous continuum, that has been annihilated. Of course, from the point of view of the tree trunk, while it's permanent, its previous continuum of a tree that was standing upright, that was alive, well, that has been annihilated. Okay, but you can go on what was before that and so forth. But yeah, we start with the tree trunk. That is permanent in the sense that its continuum remains for some time while its previous continuum is annihilated. Then you go on to the table, same thing. And then you've got the firewood. Again, same idea. Firewood exists for some time. Its continuum remains, which is why during that time it's permanent. And its previous continuum as a table, that has been annihilated during the time of the firewood. And not just that, its previous continuum of a tree trunk, of course, has also been annihilated. Everything that's gone before it has been annihilated. Okay. But that's just conventional. It makes perfect sense. If we talk like that, it makes perfect sense. But let's not forget that is just conventionally. It's just labeled. I mean, there's no trunkness in this phenomenon here, in this wood that's lying there after the tree has been chopped. There is no trunk that can be found in there. Like you look with a microscope and you find this, whoa, there's the trunk. There's this essence. That's why we call it a trunk. It seems like it's just lying there waiting to be seen as a trunk, because it is a trunk. So, it's a tree trunk. So we should be able to see it that way. But it's the other way around. It's not a tree trunk from its own side. We just label it as such. And as long as the way we define a trunk, the way we define it, if those main characteristics, usually a definition, what is a definition of something? What does it mean to define something? There's certain main characteristics based on which we've agreed to call this a trunk. Okay, and as long as these are given, although from moment by moment, this tree trunk changes. The quality, the color changes. Previously, the wood was it was moist. It was, full of sap and so forth. Well, now that is gone. It dries up. But it's still, the main characteristics are still given so that we call it a trunk. Okay, despite each moment being different. But when then a certain change takes place, we no longer talk of a tree trunk when someone crafted tables from it, right? So a table or many tables, like I said, you can probably make quite a few out of this trunk. So anyway, we're no longer called as a tree trunk. The main characteristics that we've basically agreed upon calling it tree trunk, they're no longer given. Now you have the characteristics of the defining characteristics of a table, that which how do we define a table? Well, something with a flat surface with a certain amount of legs, able to hold something. It's not difficult here because you've got chairs that do the same thing. Okay, and you could even, for a person to kind of take on a position that you've also got almost like four legs. The two arms, the two legs, and then you can put something on your back, are you a table or not? So it's really quite difficult to very precisely say this is the table or not. But just without going into that, just in terms of conventions, everyday kind of objects, this is a table, we define this as a table, so we call it a table. But it's also nothing within it, nothing intrinsically in it. No, it's not from its own side. It's not waiting to be called a table or whatever name we want to use. But this idea of table, the way we look at it, that was merely labeled. That was merely imputed by our own mind. And just because it doesn't have the characteristic it previously had of a tree trunk, that's why it's no longer called a tree trunk, but a table. And then later on, when that table falls apart, of course, these characteristics, these defining characteristics are no longer given. And now we call it firewood. But again, firewood, nothing in itself, just from the point of view of what we do with it, that we label it firewood. Okay, so hopefully that's clear that there's a conventional way, that this is totally correct. It accords with how we look at the world. Our subjective mind perceives the world. But let's not forget, it's merely labeled, again, on the basis of how we perceive the world. And then you have coming and going. Now, do you notice there's something different from the picture? I actually changed the picture. No, you wouldn't. All I did was I took the mirror image because I made a mistake. You remember with all the other attributes, I turned them always around. Instead of explaining annihilation and permanence, first annihilation and then permanence, or first cessation and then arising, I didn't explain that. I explained it in the conventional way, which would be permanence first, annihilation second, arising first, cessation second, going first and coming second. But I had this guy first coming towards me and that guy, or coming towards us, and then that guy walking away. And the other day I noticed and I was like, oh no, that's wrong. And so I just switched them around. It's pretty easy to do with a computer. So this is just the mirror image of what was previously there. And since it's so similar, I don't think you would have noticed. And that changed the wording a little bit. Okay. So with respect to the location or destination of impermanent phenomena, such as a person, they go far away from nearby. First, I had come closer from a distant place, but I changed that. They go far away from nearby and come closer from a distant place. Okay, here you go. They go away from nearby and they come closer from a distant place. Except here, I didn't say, but going and coming only exist conventionally, because we don't say that. We don't say going and coming. We say coming and going. It's just such an expression. It's the same in German. It's in English. I don't know in Hebrew whether you say coming and going or going and coming. I don't know which one it comes first. But yeah. Yeah, in Tibetan, it also seems it's also like coming and going first. So I don't want to mess with it too much. And so I mentioned coming first and going later, just because of the language. But the point is still, yes, usually we think of someone going away and then coming back conventionally. Yes, that's the case, as in the case of this person here. But on an ultimate level, of course, it doesn't matter. So coming first and going second. On an ultimate level, you don't have that order any longer because it would be so absurd. But now let's look at coming and going. What's really the difference between the two? Is there an inherent going in the first place, an inherent walking in the first place? Well, that's not the time to analyze that. We do that during the second chapter. But let's just talk about going versus coming. Is there something inherent in the walking of those two beings? If you were to take it apart, could you find this intrinsic coming and going? There's something within it that's findable? No, of course not. It's merely conventional. Merely on the basis that someone goes from where we are right now, from our position, from nearby, and goes further away from that nearby position, we call the person goes, right? And if that same person comes from a distant place, comes from far away, and is coming closer towards us, then we say come, right? I've come to Germany. I go to India. But when I'm in India, I say it the other way around, depending on where I am. So that's the way I talk from my perspective, just from the point of view of where I'm standing and where I'm going to, or with regard to another person. The person has come to Germany, will go to India. Again, but for someone in India itself, who was in India right now, it would be the other way around. So therefore, it's again merely labeled. It's merely labeled on the basis of certain characteristics. And they're both doing the same thing, walking, right? All they're doing is walking. And therefore, coming and going cannot be found. Okay. And then the last of the attributes, distinction and identity. So being distinct or different versus being identical, being one with something, the same as something. So again, Identity, being one with something, comes first. I explained that first on the basis of the sunflower. And then being different from the sunflower, well, yeah, the tulip. That is so simple. That is so simple. And you may wonder, okay, but the other ones also, it's not that difficult, really. But I mean, everyone knows a sunflower is different from a tulip, unless you really don't know flowers, right? I mean, I don't know flowers, but I know sunflowers and tulips. The rest of the names, I have no idea ever. But the point is, there's more to it. There's more to it. Because what does it say here? Sunflower, for instance, is different from anything that in terms of its meaning and its name is not identical or one with it. For being the same or one with sunflower means to have the same meaning and the same name as it has, and therefore to appear in the same way to a conceptual consciousness as it does. What is that with the conceptual consciousness? That mind, we're not even aware of that usually. We're not really aware of our conceptual consciousness. And as you study Buddhism, you learn a lot about this mind. Not so much in one go. You add pieces, bits and pieces of information as you learn about philosophy, and you get a fuller understanding of that mind that is so important, because that's the one that labels. When we say phenomena are merely designated, they only exist because they're labeled and designated, well, that's the mind we have to look at. That is the mind that is designating. That is the mind that's labeling. So, but how does this mind perceive its things? It's quite different to an eye consciousness, sense consciousness, for instance. A sense consciousness, like you have an object in front of you and it just keeps appearing, like a table, and it appears in the same way. It's the table that is impermanent. It's a table that is brown and so forth. So the brown colored table, the impermanent table, the table, they all appear the same way. They just appear as this thing over there, right? But when I ask you to close your eyes and I say brown table, impermanent table, a table that's able to hold things, carry things, and so forth. Every time I say that, although to your eye consciousness, let's say it's the same object, but if I look at the same object, I mean, I'm just looking at it. So that same object is an impermanent table, is a brown table. Let's say we're talking about a brown table. It is that table that holds things. But to our eye consciousness always appears in the same way as this table right there. But when I ask you to think about the table that's impermanent, the table that is brown, the table that holds an object, to your conceptual consciousness, something different appears, right? Just take all these objects. I say sunflower, impermanent sunflower, yellow sunflower, I don't know, sunflower with the long stem and so forth. So let's say we're actually talking about the same object, but every time it appears slightly differently to our mind. Now that is important to understand. That's important to understand for so many reasons. One main reason is that what is in charge of all our consciousnesses is the conceptual consciousness. It's the one that thinks, that makes decisions, that labels, that creates our reality. And it creates our reality on the basis of different concepts and ideas, things appearing to it. And depending on how they appear, they're different. Okay, so whether I say, for instance, if I talk about one particular person, John, I think about John. If I think John, my friend, appears differently to my conceptual consciousness versus John, my neighbor. It could be the same John, right? I'm talking about the same, let's see it. Let's say it is the same John. John is my neighbor and my friend. But John appears differently if I take to mind John, my friend. And that conceptual consciousness, thinking John, my friend, that triggers other conceptual consciousness that are more likely to be positive towards that person, to be kind towards that person. Versus John, the guy who talked bad about me, although he's my friend, but he talked bad about me 3 days ago. If I focus on that kind of John, it's the same kind of person, but to my conceptual consciousness, John appears differently. Okay, so here he's, in terms of the meaning, it's still John, but the name I've given it, the way I describe it, and John who talked bad about me in this moment, they're the same person. He talked bad about me. I'm not saying he's doing it right now, but still, because John, my friend, and John who talked bad about me 2 days ago, that person, they're different. They appear differently to my mind, and therefore they trigger a different response. Very important to come to understand why our mind does what it does. It's the thoughts we feed it, right? If we have to be very mindful. So mindfulness comes in here. What am I thinking? Am I focusing on John, the guy who talked bad about me? Well, if I go on repeat, and he's done that, I'm probably acting in such a way that John will no longer be my friend, right? I'm so pissed off with him, he talked bad about me, and whatever was before, well, who cares? My conceptual consciousness is just obsessing about that. So you see, it's important to understand how the conceptual mind works. It's not like the sense consciousness. If John is right in front of me, John right there, right? It's the one who talked bad about me 2 days ago, and it's John who's my friend. To my conceptual, to my eye consciousness, he does not appear differently, which is nice. My conceptual, my eye consciousness doesn't discriminate, but it doesn't discriminate because you can't do it. It's just not, it can't discriminate. It's just, it takes in the information, like directly experiences the things around us, but it can't think, it can't reflect, it can't label, it can't do anything more. So it's our conceptual mind that is important. But we need to be aware of how it's working to be sure to influence it. Because right now we're controlled by our mind. And the example I gave you about precious human life, we have this tendency with our conceptual mind to focus on the negative aspects, focus on the negative, right? So we're undoing this pattern. We're focusing our mind, we focus our mind on the positive aspects. Every phenomenon, you can see it from one perspective as positive and from another perspective as negative. That is only possible because things don't exist in and of themselves. So it's only in relation to something else you can see it as positive, and in relation to something different you can see as negative, right? You can do that with anything because things are not inherently good or bad. Okay. So it was in relation to something else. We'll talk much more about this, but anyway, just for now, this much. Therefore, if my tendencies, my conceptual consciousness always focusing on the negative aspect of a situation, well, what is it going to do to me? It's going to pull me down. It's going to depress me, right? Oh, my life sucks. Again, it rains, right? Well, rain is good. It gives water to the flowers and it helps. From that perspective, like, wow, it rains. Same situation, but considering the two sides. So let's take the precious human life. I'm not enlightened. I'm not liberated. I have anger and attachment. Oh my God, my mind is so full of it. It's like, it's so depressing. Samsara. Okay, that's one, that's not, and it's not wrong, but my mind's just taking that aspect of my situation, which pulls me down, which depresses me. I feel like I can't do anything. No, take the precious human life. Yes, but I'm in samsara. Yes, but wow, I have these opportunities. I've got the Dharma. I can actually get out of it and so forth. So I train my mind. Both are true, conventionally true. But what's the point to focus excessively on the first aspect of the negativity? Of course, if I have unrealistic expectations of samsara, let's look for lasting happiness within samsara, it's good to think of the disadvantages. Come on, lasting happiness, nirvanic happiness in a samsaric environment, forget about it. No way that's possible. So in that moment, it's okay to focus on that. But then you focus on the positive aspects if that is beneficial. Beneficial for, of course, our effort to experience more happiness. Become happier on our way to gaining lasting happiness. But even now, even here and now, to focus on the positive, so just that we're not that depressed. So anyway, all this is part of understanding. It's not that there's this reality out there that we're just experiencing as it is, but it's our conceptual mind that's creating this reality with the objects it perceives. It's just that the objects are what count. So you can look at the same phenomenon from a negative aspect, and that's your new reality, where you can choose to look at it from a positive angle. Both are conventionally existent, don't exist from their own side, right? And so your mind labels or designate according to, well, your intention, okay? And they're different. My situation as a samsaric being sucks and I've got enough reason to be depressed, or my existence as a samsaric being who has certain abilities and freedoms and so forth, who can actually make the best out of the situation I'm in. Okay? So it's totally in my hand, actually. My mind has to just understand that to start controlling itself. So my conceptual mind, really, when I say I have to control, I'm talking about my conceptual consciousness. I'm labeling I on the basis of this conceptual consciousness that needs to understand that it's up to me. I can change the situation depending on which objects I take to mind. And even though it refers to the same thing, actually, it's different if I look at it from this perspective or another. Whether I say John, my neighbor, or John the person, John, my friend, and John, the guy who spoke ill about me, gossiped about me. Okay? All right. Anyway, so you see, this is so important. Understanding this, everything else makes sense. So much more makes sense. The freedom we actually possess, to control our thoughts and therefore to control our reality. And of course, in a constructive way, so that we just experience more happiness, more peace of mind. Okay. Anyway, I hope this is a little clearer now, the importance of one and different, in particular in relation to the conceptual mind. All right. Now I think we're done with the 8 attributes. As I said, I wanted to go over them once again. Oh, I forgot to mention why it doesn't exist inherently. Okay, so conventionally, we say the sunflower, if sunflower, and you take, again, sunflower, appearing in the same way to your conceptual consciousness, sunflower. I mean, even the picture I chose is the same. So whether you usually to the conceptual mind, the word may appear, right? We think in a certain language, or it may even be an image. We just be an image of a sunflower, like a mental image of a sunflower, whichever it is, or John gossiping about me while John helping me, just an image of that person as like frozen in time. So if it's John, my friend, versus John, my friend, yeah, well, they're the same. John, my friend is one with John, my friend, in terms of the term I use and the image that appears. So then, of course, they're one. But different would mean, well, John gossiping about me, having that image, or John helping me, having that other image, well, they're different. Okay. So based on that, so I'm labeling on the basis of how it appears to my conceptual consciousness, and then taking flower, one with flower. So, well, saying 2 flowers is not correct. I mean, to a certain degree, yes. So this flower is one with flower. Sunflower is one with sunflower. So in a way, the 2. Sunflower is one with sunflower. And in that sense, depending on how it appears to the mind, depending on being one with something, I can say sunflower is one with sunflower. So it's not that there's an inherent being one, it's a relation to other phenomena that we label something as one with such and such. And then sunflower is different from something else. So anything that doesn't appear in the same way as sunflower, well, that is different from it. And so therefore Lama Tsongkhapa says, as the sunflower depends on all other phenomena, because the sunflower is different from all other phenomena. So when I say other, implied by that is already different. So since sunflower is different from all other phenomena, so being different is dependent, therefore, on all other phenomena. And since sunflower is different from them, it is dependent, it's one of its characteristics to be different from a tulip. So the sunflower is dependent on the tulip just from the point of view of being different from it, okay? The sunflower is dependent on a car because it's different from a car. That's one of its characteristics. Therefore, we can say the sunflower depends on the car to be different from the car. So in a way, we can say the sunflower depends on anything else to have the characteristic to be different to all these other phenomena. So that's a little bit complicated. I hope I haven't confused you too much with that. But the point is, again, being different is also just labeled. There is no different being one and being different found in the sunflower. You can take apart the sunflower as much as you want. You don't find being one with its being this one with itself or being different from something else. You don't find it within it. It's just labeled in relation to lots of other phenomena. Okay. All right. So yeah, that completes the 8 attributes. And of course, that's just the foundation for everything else. And that will come, then what comes next is just something that's a little technical, in the sense that there's this tradition when you take the different texts, in particular treatises, shastra, or denshu in Tibetan, in Sanskrit shastra, and in Tibetan denshu. Denshu or treatise is considered to be a commentary by an Indian master other than the Buddha. Usually there's this distinction between what the Buddha said and what the great masters who followed after the Buddha, what they said in their treatises, in their commentaries. So a treatise is usually seen as it's not just any treatise. We're talking about a Buddhist treatise here, of course. We're talking about writing by a Buddhist master based on what the Buddha has taught. So the sutras are different, given a different name. Here now we're looking at the shastras, the commentaries by qualified Indian masters. Sometimes some of the Tibetan texts may also be called treatises, but in the strictest sense, like from the perspective of the Tibetans, they took the scriptures of India, the sutras and the treatises, and translated them into Tibetan. That's where you got the Kangyur and the Tengyur. Kang means like translation, so Gyur means translation, Ka means word of the Buddha. So the translation of the word of the Buddha, Kangyur, and then you have the Tengyur. Then comes from Tenju, which is treatise, Gyur is translation. So again, a translation of the treatises from Sanskrit mainly from Sanskrit into Tibetan. That's the body of teaching, the precious body of teaching that is usually found in a temple, that is found in the monasteries. It's seen as so precious, it's always near the altar. Of course, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, it shouldn't just be on the altar, it should also be read. But of course, that's what they do. They study, and the Tibetan monks and nuns, and also lay people nowadays, they study those. But the point is, here, treatise, strictly speaking, refers to a treatise by a commentary by one of the masters other than the Buddha, one of the Buddhist masters who followed after Buddha Shakyamuni, like Nagarjuna. And these treatises are considered qualified, but they have to have certain aspects. They have to have certain qualities, and I call them here aspects. They have to have 4 aspects. They have to have a content, and not just any odd content, like specific content. It becomes obvious that it has to be specific content. So they have to have a content, a purpose, an ultimate purpose, and there has to be a relation of the 3 aspects to each other. So content, purpose, ultimate purpose, and relation of the 3 aspects to each other. So in the commentaries, for instance, when we studied Ornament of Clear Realization, or Abhisamaya Alamkara, that was also done on the basis, I mean, that analysis, does the Abhisamaya Alamkara, Maitreya's commentary that we studied, does that have the 4 aspects? That's considered important, because otherwise, why would you study it? It has to have these aspects, certain aspects, and if they're not given, these 4 aspects, if they're not given, then you don't want to study it. Okay, so what is the content? Dependent arising, characterized by the 8 attributes. That is the content of the text. That's explicitly shown in that homage. So the homage usually indicates these 4 aspects, explicitly or implicitly. It's basically, the idea is that someone reads this text and just from the homage knows, oh, the 4 aspects are given. Okay, so the 4 aspects are there. This is a text worthy of study. So, dependent arising, characterized by the 8 attributes, is the content. The purpose of the treatise is to eliminate doubts, misunderstandings, and any cognitive errors, in particular with regard to emptiness and dependent arising, and to enable the reader to understand them correctly. Well, yeah, sure, that is pretty obvious. I mean, in a way, it's implicit. But yeah, why else would you talk about dependent arising? And of course, characterized by the 8 attributes, we're saying doesn't exist inherently, as doesn't inherently cease, doesn't inherently arise, and so forth. So in the text, it just says does not cease, does not arise. Those are the words, but we've already learned that here the text really is saying that dependent arising doesn't inherently cease, and so forth. So based on that, well, it's really to understand emptiness. That's implicit. What is the goal? Liberation and enlightenment. That's the ultimate purpose. That's the ultimate purpose. And that is mentioned in the text, saying free, what is it? Peaceful, free from, what is it? What did I call it? Just a sec, I forget now. Without fabrication, that's right. Free from fabrication. So peaceful and free from fabrication, which basically means, well, liberation and enlightenment. That is the goal. That's the ultimate purpose, therefore. So the ultimate purpose is also given. Liberation and enlightenment characterized by peace and freedom from all fabrication is the ultimate purpose. The content of the, oh yeah, here it is, freedom from all fabrications and peace. So the contents of the text is presented for these 2 purposes. That's why we're talking about dependent arising. And what is the relation of the content of purpose and ultimate purpose? Well, the relationship is that the ultimate purpose depends on the purpose. So to really attain liberation and enlightenment, I have to eliminate doubts, misunderstanding, any cognitive errors with regard to emptiness and dependent arising. And to do that, I need the content. And the content depends on the treatise itself. So what does this show? What is this actually saying? It's saying this treatise is able to take me to enlightenment. How is that the case? Well, it has a certain content, the purpose of which is to eliminate doubt and misunderstandings when it comes to emptiness. And my understanding of emptiness leads me to enlightenment. Therefore, this treatise is worthy of study. Okay, so basically, there's this short analysis at the beginning of a treatise usually. Are these 3 given? Is there an ultimate purpose that is indicated, a purpose, a content, and is that relationship also given, that the ultimate purpose depends on the purpose depends on the content, and the content depends on the treatise, on that particular treatise, here in this case, fundamental wisdom. Okay, it's not really that difficult, but it's just that style of teaching at that time that was considered to be important to point it out, so that, well, a person, I mean, nowadays we've got customer reviews and recommendations and what have you to know, is this a text worthy of study? But at that time it was different. Communication didn't have that level of communication and so forth. So this was a way to see whether a text was appropriate to study or well, a qualified treatise. So the content and the ultimate purpose are explicitly indicated. Content, yeah, the 8 attributes, the ultimate purpose by the words peace and freedom from all fabrication. Well, the purpose and the relation are implicit in the homage. Great, all right. Now, the fundamental wisdom is a treatise of the universal vehicle. Mahayana, or I think a better translation is universal vehicle. Holiness, of course, talks about the Nalanda tradition, but to use the word vehicle, because that's what is used in Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary, for instance. So talking about the universal vehicle, but it's a text of the universal vehicle, but it teaches, like many treatises of the foundational vehicle, the Hinayana or foundational vehicle or the Pali tradition, the view of emptiness or selflessness, and does not expound on any special features of the universal vehicle, such as great compassion, bodhicitta, and so forth. Okay, so this text, of course, implicit, yes, but explicitly it doesn't talk about it. It doesn't talk about compassion and bodhicitta and so forth. This is why the commentary we studied before we studied this text, Entry into the Middle Way, is also called the supplement, because it adds those, it supplements. It's a commentary on this fundamental wisdom. Chandrakirti's Entry into the Middle Way is a commentary on the fundamental wisdom, but it adds those features of compassion and love and so forth. The fundamental wisdom only talks about emptiness and selflessness, emptiness, and that's it. So it's like a text, a treatise of the foundational vehicle. So this is actually in answer to, oh no, wait, I'll first finish this and then I'll say in answer to which question this is. Anyway, however, this does not mean that Nagarjuna's work belongs to both the foundational and universal vehicle. For the selflessness of phenomena is presented only briefly in the teachings of the foundational vehicle, but extensively in the teachings of the universal vehicle, and therefore in the fundamental wisdom. So the fundamental wisdom, what is the difference between a teaching on emptiness of the universal vehicle of the Mahayana and a teaching on emptiness or a text on emptiness of the Hinayana or the foundational vehicle? The difference is, especially the emptiness of phenomena is only briefly presented in a text of the foundational vehicle, but extensively in the text of the universal vehicle. Okay, and we had that before. Jimmy asked this question about it's not mentioned. Is it not mentioned in the text, like the emptiness of phenomena? Well, here Lama Tsongkhapa certainly thinks so. Certainly points this out. This is actually from the Ocean of Reasoning, and he's not the only one. It's pointed out again and again that it is there, but not as extensively presented as the selflessness of person. And anyway, if you compare the texts of the universal vehicle and of the foundational vehicle, in general, there are more extensive explanations on emptiness. And that makes sense because the goal is that of becoming first a bodhisattva. That's the main goal. The ultimate purpose, the main ultimate purpose that is set forth, which is enlightenment. For that, you become a bodhisattva first, and then practice to become a Buddha. And for that, you need to have a very extensive understanding of emptiness, such that you can teach it to others in that extensive fashion. That is not the goal. I mean, the goal of a bodhisattva is to teach all of the sentient beings, to guide all of the sentient beings to enlightenment. And you better know emptiness really extensively to be able to teach it according to people's needs and so forth. Of course, you can do that best once you're a Buddha, but you can still do a lot while you're a bodhisattva. So that knowledge is important. Sorry, time is up. I didn't realize I spent that much time on the 8 attributes. I hope you're not in a rush. I still haven't started with the first verse, but that is just the nature of the class. And this is how I was educated, for instance. Sometimes before we actually started with the text, there's a lot of groundwork that needed to be covered. And we spent a long time on certain ideas as a preparation. And yeah, I want to do the same thing to hopefully give you a good foundation for what is going to come. All right. So that's it for today. All that's left is to meditate on what we've learned. And I'd like to meditate on what we did today. We already meditated on it last time, but I think it's so important, especially to stress the fact that arising, cessation, and so forth don't exist inherently, to focus on that more specifically. All right. So let's start. Oops. Let's start by, of course, first focusing on the breath. Become mindful of the breath. To be fully focused. Buddhist philosophy is strongly based on causality. Such as law of cause or karma and effect. Karma and its effect. So it's seen as essential to understand the idea of phenomena arising and ceasing. A karmic effect arises at the time of its cause. But it only comes into existence once it has arisen. And once the karmic effect, certain experience that is the result of a volitional action, once it has arisen, it is ceasing. That is changing moment by moment and eventually become non-existent. but their rising and ceasing are merely labeled. Based on the fact that a karmic effect has a cause that needs to precede it. And based on the fact that at some point the karmic effect exists, is there, has arisen, we label that the karmic effect is arising during its course. And based on the fact that once the karmic effect has arisen, and it's changing all the time until it completely disappears, we label it as ceasing. They don't exist inherently. We used to say that this karmic effect is permanent in that its continuum remains as long as we experience this karmic effect. While the cause of this effect has been annihilated, it's no longer there. Continuum of the cause is gone. But again, that permanence of one thing and annihilation of something else is just labeled. Since the karmic experience, karmic effect, doesn't have the characteristics such that we would call it a karmic cause, and thus we say the karmic cause has been annihilated. Previously it was there, now it's gone. Wow, the experience that is a karmic result has all the defining characteristics to be called such. And that's we talk about in remaining. Talk about its permanence. And then there's coming and going. Movement. From one location to another. Which is not just true for a person, but even the entire world. Moving. As the sun moves around, as the earth moves around the sun. And that movement can be divided into coming and going. Moving towards something and moving away from it. But within that movement, no intrinsic coming or going can be found. They're merely labeled on the perspective of the person talking or using those concepts. From my perspective, someone is coming. From another perspective, the same person is going. Again, that's merely labeled. Based on those perspectives. And then there's distinction and identity. Being different or one with something. Whatever exists is one with itself, and different from the rest of phenomena. And again, being one or different cannot be found within the object that is one and different. It's in relation to how something appears to conceptual consciousness that we label one or different from something, one with or different from something. Yet although none of these attributes exist beyond being merely labeled, they do exist. In fact, they can only exist since they're just labeled. Now, to conclude your analysis, focus on whichever insight you have gained. Single-pointedly try to internalize this insight by focusing on it. And then let's dedicate all the positive potential we've accumulated today together by dedicating it towards our full enlightenment. May this become a cause for us to remove all the hindrances to enlightenment, to state of a Buddha, for the welfare of all sentient beings. May it also become a cause for our great lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the other wonderful masters and lamas, to have an extremely long life and remain healthy and strong. Continue to guide us. And may, of course, our virtue or positive potential accumulated today come a cause for those who are ill, like Geshe Punso, Tali Lubin, and everyone else physically or mentally ill, to soon get better. And may help especially those who are depressed and sad and downtrodden, to develop a more positive outlook and find more peace and happiness, even right now. And then without letting go of those thoughts, let's recite the prayers together. Through the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. In the land encircled by snow mountains, you are the source of all happiness and good. All-powerful Chenrezig Denzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. Thank you very much. Sorry, I still didn't make it to finish on time. I'll try harder, and yeah, this was 8 minutes. But anyway, so I hope you have a great week, and I see you again next week. Bye.
Thank you, Geshe-ma. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Geshe-ma.